I have analyzed addiction's strategy. I have analyzed the way it seems to attack a human being. And I've encountered 4 levels of it in my analysis. It attacks at the level of spirit, and we feel that as separation, intense longing for, which gets shifted into longing for a drug or an alcohol or a person or some addictive substance or behavior. We feel that longing as craving. It starts out as a spiritual longing to connect with the divine. And then it gets warped and perverted into this weird craving for something that acts as a substitute for the divine, which could never be, which is why it's so vacuous. That's why the more drugs we use, the less fulfilling it is. The more we turn to sex addiction, the less fulfilling it is. The more we get into any kind of addiction, the less fulfilling it is. Because it isn't ultimately the solution to the issue. So that's the spiritual piece of how addiction is coming at us, is it's taking advantage of this separation and it's building upon it. Often in recovery circles we'll say our addiction is just waiting to get us alone. Right? You close the door to your apartment or your home and there you are, it's you and it. And that sort of way of looking at it is giving addiction a whole lot of power. It just simply means that when we're caught in isolation, that it's really a hotbed for addiction to root in a human being. That isolation, that loneliness, that separateness, it's building upon a spiritual malady, a misunderstanding that we have that we're separate. Okay. The second level of addiction's attack that I'm noticing how we experience it is mental. Mental. We feel it in the mind. We feel put upon by our mind. I think anybody here could understand what I'm talking about, yeah? Right, when the mind seems to be your master, rather than you being the master of your mind. And that old wonderful saying is, the mind is a terrible master, but a wonderful servant. So what part of our work in recovery is to learn how to direct the mind, to have the mind serve the heart and the soul, rather than to have the mind dominate. The mind dominates, that mind-dominated reality is a fear-based reality. It's ego-based reality. Addiction really takes advantage of that space. Really amplifies our thinking. I have this theory that people who really struggle with addiction are very sensitive people. We spoke about it a little bit this morning. And I feel that that sensitivity, while a gift, also makes us a bit vulnerable to addiction's attack at the mental level. Because we're sort of put upon by this intense thinking. And it's a kind of a neurotic and can be a psychotic way of being in the world. Like we are at the mercy of our thinking, and we are confused in that we think that our thinking is what's going on. That our thinking, these thoughts that come up, that's what's happening. We attach onto that, and then we take an action to make the mental idea or the mental construct that's taking place, we take an action to manifest it into reality. When you're stuck in addiction, what we notice, that I say, whether you're stuck in addiction or not, you're an unbelievably creative entity. It's just that when you're in addiction, you're creating a lot of pain and disharmony and darkness. When you're in recovery, now you can create harmony and you can create spontaneity, beautiful things, love, connection, beauty. So that's the second place. We're feeling addiction's attack at the level of the mind. Then we have the body. The body, we're going to, first we'll look at the brain. The way addiction works on the brain is very much like, I look at the image I have is of a saw going through a piece of wood. You have a thought, the saw goes forward. You take an action because of that thought. A stimulus of some kind. There's something from the outside that causes you to act in a certain way, and it creates a neural pathway, much like an axe going through wood, a saw going through wood. The more you do the action and repeat it based upon the stimulus coming in, the deeper the groove is, the harder it is to change. Ultimately, it never becomes impossible, but it becomes so extraordinarily difficult that it feels like it's impossible. We say in recovery circles all the time, like, we lost the power of choice. It isn't exactly true, but it's pretty much true. Meaning, the power of choice can be restored. But in that moment, for that period of time, we might have lost the power of choice. The compulsion to act out in whatever addictive way has become so ingrained in the brain, in the neural circuitry of the brain, that we can't break out of it without help. We don't have enough power to overcome the pull of what we have created. That's called powerlessness. And we talk about it, and there are a number of complaints I hear from people who reject 12-step philosophy, usually before they've actually gone through the 12 steps. But one of those complaints is, I don't like the idea of powerlessness. Well, nobody likes the idea of powerlessness, but we do want to admit that we have less power than what is needed to deal with the situation. So then we can go out and we can say, well, if we have less power, where would we source more power? Where would we be able to find it? That's what our job is. We want to go out and source more power. Right. Also at the level of the brain, you're dealing with some very, very, very specific chemistry, which really we don't want to mess with the natural functioning of the chemistry of the brain. We're talking about the pleasure centers of the brain, dopamine, endorphins, all the chemicals, neurotransmitters, all the things that make us feel a certain kind of way. When we start taking substances in our behaviors, we start to tinker with that chemistry. Now, we can get into exciting situations, we can excite ourselves, and dopamine levels go up. We get excited. We want to do more of this thing. So the first thing that's really powerful that we can think of in our minds, everybody can think of it, that gets us excited, is the sexual act. And it just so happens that sex doubles your dopamine levels in the brain. Well, when you do methamphetamine, it multiplies the dopamine levels in your brain by 12. Now, the sexual act for most normal people is the most powerful thing that they feel in the mind-body system. But here we are with a drug like methamphetamine, and cocaine is something like 10 or 11 times. You're boosting your dopamine levels to an extent where, first of all, it's so extreme and so unnatural that the body is unable to really handle it. What the body does is, the rush of dopamine through the brain literally changes the way that the brain operates in such a way that when the dopamine levels come back down to what would normally be your normal level, to you, it would feel like you're dying. You would feel an unbelievable state of depression. You would feel no excitement to wake up in the morning, and you would look out into the world and you would say, there's no point to any of it. That's how you would feel. Now, think about the cocaine or the methamphetamine addict showing up at treatment. They show up, they're psychotic. If you've ever seen anybody who's been deep into methamphetamine or cocaine, they have psychosis and they may be hallucinating. There's an incredible sense of paranoia. This, of course, is coupled by the fact that it takes away your ability to sleep. And so sleep deprivation plays into that a lot. Anybody here have any experience with cocaine or methamphetamine? Yeah. Woohoo! Yeah, good for us. So we've been down that road, and I remember this one young man who arrived at treatment when I was there, and he was literally crazy. He's methamphetamine psychosis. He was absolutely psychotic. And he was seeing things. It was vampires, police were coming, the whole thing, unbelievable paranoia, anxiety. And they were giving him meds to help him ease that anxiety, but he was still out of his mind. About 3 days later, the hallucinations stopped. He had slept about 30 hours in the last 30 hours, you know. And he started to feel better. He had a meal, and he left. Left treatment. And I later would come to understand it, totally. I mean, this guy's dopamine levels went from here to here. And it was intolerable, unacceptable. And it would take some time for somebody, for their brain to heal. Do you understand what I'm saying? So one of the things we have to understand when we're in early recovery or when we're working with people is we must explain to them up front, listen, there are going to be difficult times, not because there are difficult times. Because the chemistry in your brain and the way your brain operates is healing itself. And it's going to take a little while for it to heal to the extent where you can start to feel better again. It won't matter what's going on in the outside world. Now, Recovery 2.0 protocol would say we can help that person along by putting them on a super nutrient dense diet. Huge amount of juice, unbelievable amount of juice going into this body to flush toxins out, to bring nutrition that's easily absorbable into the body in enormous amounts, helping that person with sauna, cold plunge, sauna, right? Expand, contract, helping a person with all the healing modalities we have in our ability can help these people move through that period of discomfort quicker. Unfortunately, we haven't yet adopted this into most of our treatment modalities, so that's an area that we're missing. But this is the body from the perspective of the brain. This is one of the things that addiction is going to amp up and take a foothold in the physical body. Of course, also the body itself, the organic system, the tissues and the muscles of the body, and of course, just physical addiction, which is based in the brain, but also it's going to have a full body implication, if you will. If you've ever been around anybody who's coming off of any opiate, for example, heroin, raise your hand if you've ever helped anybody through that 5 to 7 horrendous days that somebody has to go through. Yeah, painful to watch. And you know that as they're going through it, the likelihood of them staying sober is extremely low for the reasons that we're discussing now. So you see, at the level of spirit, at the level of mind, at the level of body, emotions, right? Emotions are going to be all over the place as we're in addiction. And basically, the way I look at it is there's a runaway horse, and I'm holding on for dear life, and I'm at the mercy of this horse going wherever it wants to go. I don't feel like I have control over my life. I have lost the power of choice. I have messed with my chemistry. I have messed with my entire experience of being alive, and I am now in deep, deep trouble. Okay. The last level that I want to discuss that represents the fourth dimension of addiction's attack on a human being is the way we perceive time. At the level of time. So spirit, mind, body. Body, mind, spirit, time. Okay, time. Our relationship with time becomes extremely skewed in addiction. And therefore, in recovery, we're going to have to take it into consideration if we want our outcomes to improve. What I mean by this is, in addiction, we seem to acutely be stuck in subconscious past, which causes us to behave in these repeating, self-defeating, and destructive ways. And at the same time, where we can't tolerate the present, so we can't wait for the future to show up. And this was voiced perfectly by a sponsee that I worked with who told me, this was a guy who was 38 years old, and he had told me he'd been on opiates for about 18 years. So from age 20 to 38. And he was now about 11 months sober when he was telling me this story. He said, you know, Tommy, I feel like I'm behind. I feel like I missed my life. Like life just passed me by. And it's a terrible feeling. At the same time, I feel like I'm craving the future. I can't wait for the future to get here quick enough. I can't stand just being. Right? And I thought, wow, I feel like I've missed out on life, but at the same time I'm trying to bring the future here. The only thing missing from that equation is the present moment. Right? And I can't think of a more exact and powerful description of addiction than that. That is what addiction does to us at the level of our perception of time. We cannot find comfort in our own skin because the present moment is simply intolerable to us. I tell you about the 4 levels of addiction's attack because if we don't take this attack at all these levels into consideration, we cannot improve upon our outcomes in recovery. Do you guys understand that we're not doing very well in the recovery movement? Yes. In terms of our success rates? Yeah?
Yes.
Yeah. It's trouble. It's difficult. So, 1.5 million people will go into treatment in 2017. 80% of them will relapse in the first 60 days out. So that's an extraordinary failure. Unacceptable. It's not anybody's fault. The system that's currently set up isn't looking at addiction in the way I feel is necessary for it to do better. And you as an individual will do very well to consider these multiple levels in your hopefully holistic approach to healing in life. That's why we talk about and we analyze this attack of addiction. So in recovery, the modality at the right moment, right? Addiction has stages, recovery has stages too. But at the right moment, the modality must include mind, body, spirit, and time. We have to treat this thing at all those levels. And when we do, our outcomes will magnificently increase, will improve. Yeah?